what we're going to do is sort of talk about various moments in the process of writing the dissertation. I've taught for several years a course called a dissertation seminar, in which students who have just finished their general examinations are expected to start thinking about and producing writing about their doctoral projects. So I'm going to address, in a sense, those first moments when you've gone through the hurdles, you've stopped classwork, presumably, and are now facing this moment where, at least in the English department, and I think in most departments, you're expected to produce a dissertation proposal. So I wanted to just speak to some potential trouble spots that occur, or that I've seen occur in students I've been working with at this stage in their progress for several years. So this is a moment when you have no more classes, and when I was at that moment, I was like, finally. So tired of taking classes, producing papers, and all of that. This is why we go to doctoral programs, is to have the freedom to commit ourselves to our own project. Now, this requires, however, a kind of transition, because of course we're used to taking classes and we're used to being told what to do by our professors and having assignments given to us. And so you're going to be making, if you're at this stage in the process, a transition to a very different kind of relation to your scholarly work. It's a relation where you have to, in a sense, become the captain of your own ship, and where you have to take responsibility for getting the kind of guidance that you need. So one of the dangers of this moment, of this kind of newfound freedom, is that you will basically burrow into your project and not be heard again for like 2 or 3 years. Okay, and it's tempting for many reasons, in a sense, to sort of treat this stage as a real break from what came before. And I want to encourage you that it's probably more productive not to think of it that way, right? Writing the dissertation, of course, comes out of the work that you've been doing in classes and the reading that you've been doing in your program and in journals and that sort of thing, conferences that you've gone to. And in a more particular way, this transition requires you to really be self-conscious about what kind of relationship you want to have to your own work, and also about what kind of relationship you want to have to the faculty members who will be your allies, right, in this process. As you probably have figured out, if you've been in the academy any length of time, there's a whole variety of personalities in the academy. And so it's really important to figure out which are the personalities that you're working with and what kind of roles can they play for you. And if I could just give you an example from my own graduate training, I teamed up with an advisor, and it took me a while to realize, this was someone working in American literature, and he was really, it turned out to be working in an area very different from mine. He was very much an aesthete. It turned out that I was really much more of a historian, a literary historian. But it occurred to me that what I found so helpful to working with this particular faculty member and having him as my advisor was, I got to work out some emotional baggage, having this kind of daddy figure who I really wanted his approval and respect. So in a sense, he was a very skeptical reader for the kind of work I wanted to do, but knowing that he was going to be reading my work and knowing, in a sense, the quality of his work and the quality of his thinking, it pushed me, right? It pushed me. And so that's one practical way that I think thinking about the kind of personalities you're dealing with on your committee can be helpful to you. So it's not just about a matter of, is this person an expert in the field you want to work in, although that is, of course, should be a prime consideration for you. But in general, you want to assemble a team of faculty members with whom you can work and think about what are their strengths and weaknesses in terms of what they can do for you. At this moment when there's a potential that you might vanish and burrow in and not be heard from again for a while, I want to encourage you to remain present, right, in your department and with your peers in your program, and to start thinking about, right, the process of coming up with a dissertation topic as a great opportunity to imagine the professional profile you want to acquire. So one thing that I have students in my dissertation seminar do, right, is to draft a dissertation proposal that is informed by their trying to think or see 3 years down the road, for the moment when they are hopefully finishing a dissertation, applying to jobs, applying to fellowships. What will you be wanting to say about yourself 3 years down the road? Okay, so on the one hand, you're entering this moment where you're free to burrow into a very specific project finally. And I'm suggesting that it's very important that as you do that, right, you also be continually thinking about what your professional profile will be. How will you be describing the work you did, right, in your dissertation to diverse audiences? Part of the process of writing a dissertation is learning how to translate the work you're doing for ever larger audiences. The first audience, right, is going to be probably the faculty members on your dissertation committee. It will be colleagues in your department. But it will eventually be, right, people on fellowship committees, people on postdoctoral fellowship committees, and hiring committees. And those are people, right, who have to understand what it is that you're doing and why you think it's important. And so, as you're burrowing into the actual research of your dissertation, it's important to always be stepping back, right, and thinking about how do I translate this work. And so the first thing to do, right, as part of that transition period is imagine what kind of dissertation you want to write. Write a dissertation proposal, 3 pages. What are you going to put in it, right? Define your topic. What's the problem? What's the big question you want to ask? And something that I often encourage my students to think about is, what's its significance? How do you define its significance? And of course, that can seem like a complicated thing or amorphous, but one way to think about it is to go back to this question that I asked you about what kind of professional profile you have, right? If you're going on the job market and you are saying that you're capable of teaching courses, say, in the history of American literature since the Civil War, that you could teach courses about genre, and that you have a special interest in theories of public memory, or what have you, right? 2 or 3 areas that you have a real forte, an experience in, a knowledge base in, that you would be bringing to the institution that you work for, right? Those are areas, right, in which you can be thinking about your dissertation as conversations, right? These are the scholarly conversations in which you are seeking to place your work, right? And so you can start thinking about those conversations from the minute you start conceiving of your dissertation. And by doing that, right, you will have a leg up on this fundamental challenge of translating your work to its wider circles of significance and making it accessible to other areas. So this is one kind of area, this transition moment to this new time of independence is one thing to think about. And I want to address another trouble spot that comes up, which is how do you define your research project and its significance if you haven't actually done the research? And of course, this is a little sleight of hand that you will become a master at, right? As you apply for fellowship proposals, it's like, you know exactly what this is. It's half done, right? And of course, when you actually do it, you will find yourself in the position of having to rationalize what you actually did, and that may in fact be something very different, right, from what you intended. But that is as it should be. That's part of the process of writing a dissertation. Now, it's very an important challenge that comes up in these initial stages is a lack of specificity. You may be very clear about the kinds of conversations you want to contribute to because, in a sense, those are conversations your mentors are contributing to and expecting you to contribute to, or you read journal articles, you're inspired by certain kinds of work. But what are you actually going to contribute to it? And it's very easy for students at this stage to get lost in generalities and seem to be wanting to do everything and very big ambitions. And my advice to students is just start writing and don't fixate, right, on having this broader plan. Pick what is closest to you in terms of your excitement and inspiration and start writing. Just start writing. And this is something I think you should be doing even as, right, you're balancing this other task, right, of writing a dissertation proposal, writing fellowship abstracts, and engaging in all these production of professional documents, which you will be doing, right, as part of your development as a teacher and a scholar. And so, in this process of just getting going, of just starting to write, I think it's very helpful to focus on an object. What's a primary object, a primary text, a primary piece of evidence with which that you're most excited to be working on? Start writing about it. Generate questions that revolve around the kind of evidence that you're engaging in. What questions are appropriate to this kind of, this artifact that you're writing about? What kind of contexts? Historical, theoretical, critical, methodological, conceptual. What kinds of contexts might you situate this text, this artifact, this body of evidence distinctive body of evidence that you want to work with, right? And in answering those questions, right, of course, you won't just be writing about the artifact, you'll be generating the intellectual architecture, right, for your dissertation. And so as some last tips I want to suggest, once you are doing these dual tasks as you enter into your dissertation project, I think it's very helpful to think about arguments, scholarly arguments, as narratives. What stories do you have to tell about your texts and your artifacts? I think mature scholarship is self-conscious about the evidence it's using and the questions it's raising about that evidence. And when you're able to tell a compelling story about your artifacts or texts that is compelling to an increasingly broader audience, right, broadening circle out from your dissertation committee, etc., right, that's a moment when people will start offering you fellowships and jobs.
I think I pick up on the just start writing part, because I wanted to talk a little bit about something that I think goes by a misnomer, and the misnomer is writer's block. I think that either we're all sick with this or it's a misnomer. Every project has within it moments when you're having a little trouble getting the writing going. And in my experience, there are multiple moments like that. It isn't that you just get past it when you start writing. You return to these moments throughout the project. So I've discovered around here that when you ask people, and I think in general in life, when you ask people for advice, they tell you exactly what they did, and they just say, do it like that. So I thought I would try to, for my sake and for yours, separate these out into points that I think will be applicable to everybody, points that might not be applicable to everybody, and then some idiosyncratic kinds of tips that worked for me and have worked for some people whom I know. So the first one that I think is generally applicable, and of course the danger point is one that you all probably will recognize, and some of you might recognize too well. I certainly recognize it. The danger point is it's always hard when you're working on a project to get to the point when you feel that you have done sufficient research, right? That you are ready to write because you really have a handle on this thing. And I have lots of conversations with grad students where they say, well, I'm just not ready to write that yet because I still have to And then, there's always more research that we can do. There are always more sources we can look at. There are always more interviews we can conduct. There's a whole world of information that's adjacent and goes through our projects that we know we haven't gotten to yet. And so part of the problem is getting past that so that you don't stay in that stage. And of course, this happens, right? You'll have a conversation with a student and they'll say, well, I just haven't done this other piece yet. And 3 months later, which is supposed to be writing time, right? They're still sort of reading through what turned out to be a rather complicated piece of research. So the key to making good time is to avoid some of that. And one of the best ways to avoid some of that is just start writing. And the other generally applicable and I think helpful piece of advice that we could give is write every day. Something happens with your brain and your brain's engagement with your project when you are writing every day. So even if there are, and there inevitably are, little pieces of research you have to scoop up because you haven't gotten to them yet, or you realize you're going to need to bring them into your chapter that you're working on, as you do those, you still must write every day. Make progress with other things that you know you can begin to push along. And you begin to have a kind of engagement with your project that's deeper, that gives you a sense that it's really going to happen. And so that's the first tip. The second one is a little more idiosyncratic, but I swear by it. Think about, and this is for people really in the writing stage of the dissertation, think about writing a minimum number of pages a day. This is, John Updike said that he wrote 3 pages a day, and worked for him. I think when I was writing my dissertation, I wrote 5 pages a day, and it worked for me. I know this has worked for other people. If you can do this and you begin to get you begin to get headway, and you begin to get headway very quickly. Now, I can see some of you may be thinking, she's crazy, can't do that. There's no way I can write 3 to 5 pages every day in this writing phase. But one of the things that I think is key here is that you're going to work out some of the problems in your dissertation through the writing. And so you must be doing this writing in order to work them out. You're not going to be able to work them out separate from the writing process. So if you're writing 3 to 5 pages a day, it's understood that those are not going to be your fully fledged final draft pages that you're coming up with, but you're doing the work while you're writing those pages of thinking through the project, and you can now do the math. Right? If you're writing 3 pages a day in 2 weeks, and I'm not giving time for weekends off, remember you're writing every day, you'll have 42 pages, right? If you write 5 pages a day in 2 weeks, you'll have 70 pages. And you can begin to think, you can begin to see how psychologically important this is. If you start this tomorrow, if you haven't been doing it, write 5 pages every day for 2 weeks, you'll be 70 pages further into your dissertation than you are today.
That's 1/3. Depending on the discipline.
Yeah, depending on the department. And some departments, it could be, just the introduction. But don't think about it that way. Think about, once you have that sort of dirty draft, right, of 70 pages, 42 pages that you've done in 2 weeks, then you're in a very different psychological position, and you're at a different level of work with this material. It's at that point that you can then go back and you can now see where the holes are, you can see where the pieces are that you need to fill in, that you need to polish. It's a different kind of writing task, and it's also, I can tell you this, psychologically very calming. Right? It's different to be working on a draft and perfecting it than to be inching along half a page at a time and feeling as if you're just not going to get there. So I encourage you to write every day and to write a lot every day. So that's point number 2. So point number 3 is a little more idiosyncratic, but I like it. So, and it definitely works for me, and I still do this very often. what slows us down when we're writing? Sometimes what slows us down is the need to stop and look up the perfect quote that we know we want to use, and we have to go find it, and then we go find it, and then when we find it, we need to read the passage before and after it, and then we think about, we read the footnote, and we look up something that's cited there, and we go, so I always think about, when my kids were little and I'd go to their dance recitals, and especially when they were about 5, they'd sort of dance across the floor, and there was always a 5-year-old who would just sort of do this in the middle and just start to look at the wall and forget about the dancing. But we're all susceptible to this, even as adults. We get distracted, right? And it's very easy to get distracted when you go and look at your notes or when you go and look at your material. So another thing that has worked for me is to write without notes. So this is like, flying without a net, but it does work. It's not as if your notes are going away, right? They're still going to be there. If you need to remind yourself about what's in them, you can, or what's in your sources, you can take a little bit of time in the morning. I would say no more than an hour and a half in most disciplines, and of course, your work can vary widely. It might take you just 45 minutes. I would try to telescope that into a very finite time over breakfast and a cup of coffee instead of reading the New York Times. You'll go over your notes, the things that you want to have in your mind when you're writing for the day. You put them aside and you write. And believe me, a lot of the stuff that you need is in there, right? You don't have the exact quotes in your head, but you know that there's a quote like this. And in your writing, you can put in brackets, insert that thing that, Senator Stevens said when he was on the train. And you'll know where to go back and find that when it's time to go back and plug it in. Some people like doing this in reverse. They do the sort of writing part, and then they go and look at the notes. And then they go back and incorporate things that they've thought, that they've found back in. But I do recommend trying to separate a little bit so that you don't get caught up in and distracted by the wealth of material that's available. This is particularly hard, I think, now that we have the web. Right, because you don't have to even go into the next room or get out of your chair. You can just click to the screen, and you can pick up a lot of your sources electronically these days. And so the temptation is going to be to toggle back and forth and to bring things in. So I think it's just try this and see if it works for you. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But I think a lot of people who have tried it have found that it's very helpful. If you really discipline yourself and say, I'm not looking at the sources now, I'm writing. You'll give yourself a chance to get a sense of this. Last little point is, you're going to want to incorporate all the other things that you do while you're writing every day. You're going to have to cut back on some of those things, but you want to continue to be, an active scholar and going to talks. I find it's helpful sometimes right before you write to read a couple of pages by someone whose writing you really admire. Your head sort of picks up the tone of that and is aware that that's what you're trying to reproduce when you're writing. And I think that's very helpful for all of us to have just right in the ear, right before you start to write, the sense of what it is you're shooting for. Don't get so caught up in that, however, in the stylistic questions that you pause, right? Because what you're going for is writing every day and writing a lot every day. And you can go back and fix the tone and play with the style and make these kinds of adjustments later once you have the draft of your full dissertation, which if you continue to do the math, you can see. We used to have this quaint thing called the write-up year, and most of us who were on the faculty wrote our dissertations in a year. It is perfectly possible to do so. It's not crazy to think that that's possible. And one of the ways that you do it is to try to get a complete draft. So instead of writing a perfect chapter, once you have the draft of a chapter, go on to the next chapter, and soon you will have a draft of your dissertation. I left out one tiny thing. This is just important as a last little point. graduate students and fellow academics are really helpful very often as a support group, and some people have found that it's good to get in a room with other graduate students to write in this writing phase. They're not perfect, though, and I have found that sometimes it's really good to have someone who's not an academic to check in with, and it's like having a partner in AA, you know? You have this person who will say to you from time to time, how's it going, you know? And how many pages did you write this week? That's a really good question. Your advisor's not going to ask you that question, but if your partner, your mother, your cousin, your aunt, somebody else can ask you this question, it's actually very helpful just to have somebody who's a sort of touchstone for you and knows that you want to get through this project in a certain amount of time, and you want, invite that person to stay on you, and to check on your progress in a pretty regular way and see how it's going, so that you can have with that non-academic person that sort of touchstone, somebody who cares about you, wants to see you get to the other side of this project, and can just help talk you through problems. So that's my 6 cents.
So, yep, so thanks so much for inviting me to be part of this. It's always fun to discover you might be an expert on something you never thought about that way. When I was a grad student, we never had things like this, and we used to joke that writing dissertations was like sex and families, like it's the main thing you're supposed to do to reproduce the institution, but nobody ever tells you about how to do it, and maybe they'll hand you a little guidebook or something, but basically you feel like you're on your own a lot of the time. But I think times have changed about both sex and families and dissertations, so good, that's excellent. Also, important to remember that your friends and older siblings might have good ideas, but they might also have misinformation. So anyway, unsurprisingly, and I'm happy to say, because I have so much admiration for Lori, a lot of our advice is very similar. So I have actually 3 points I want to talk about, and they will echo, maybe give slightly different angles, some of the points that Lori raised. I call them turn it into a job, beat the devil, how do you know when you're done, and maybe a little discussion of our writing groups helpful. So the first one is actually advice I got when I was finishing my dissertation at the CUNY Graduate Center, and one of my advisors was a wonderful sociologist of labor, Bill Kornblum. And we were, after a department colloquium, keep going to your department colloquiums, show up. People, you never know, the person giving the talk might offer you a job someday. We went to the bar at the Grad Center in the old days, and I said, so Bill, how do I know if I can go to the movies on Saturday night? So he said, it's a job. I said, when do you want to finish? Then he said, think back a month. That's when you have to have your 300 pages finished. That's not counting your bibliography and your footnotes. Now let's count the weeks. How many pages a week? Very similar kind of advice. And in my case, it was like 22 pages a week. And he said, if you don't have 22 pages done by 4 o'clock on Saturday, you're not going to the movies. And the biggest gift of that was taking it out of this realm of this monumental thing. You think you're going to write the smartest thing since Capital or whatever your field happens to be, and you have the blank page, you have your mountains of field notes or lab notes or archival documents or whatever, and imagining your way from the blank page to that final point is really the job, and turning it into something that is like, this is labor. You've got to find your way through that labor and how many things you can do, how much you can actually do. Of course, nothing is ever as ordinary as that. Your mother gets sick, you go on a postdoctoral interview, whatever, you'll have that. But if you kind of have both a weekly quota, a daily quota, if that works for you, every month, where are you in terms of your progress? How much faster do you need to go? Do you need to not take up those extra invitations that might come your way, including possibly being on a panel or giving a talk? I think I see a lot of our grad students as there are more and more possibilities and things opening up for people at the level of writing up in terms of giving talks and so forth. All of those are wonderful opportunities. They're temptations. Every one of them takes twice as long as you think it is. If you're going to go give a talk at somebody's conference, it's all the time preparing, it's all the time coming back. If it doesn't directly feed your dissertation, say no, or find a way to make it feed your dissertation. The distractions available to you at every level are enormous, and the hardest thing is keeping the discipline. Beat the devil. So I guess having written my dissertation when the dinosaurs roamed the earth at the transition from the typewriter to the computer, I did not have the constant temptation, because even though we were on computers, we did not have the internet available to us at any time when our minds started to wander, and believe me, I'm as ADD as anybody. So I actually thought of silk screening a t-shirt to hand to all my students when they're at the point of starting to really write, and it's going to say, email is the enemy of thought, and I could add now email, Facebook, YouTube, just go down the line of social media. They're all extremely tempting. You really don't need to know what your best friend had for dinner at the restaurant in the East Village last night and what it looked like on her iPhone. Don't open it. But everybody has the hour of the day when they hit the wall. For me, it's 4. I need a really strong coffee and to walk around the block or whatever. Pick your time. Be very, very disciplined. It is the devil. And unfortunately, you're working on the same platform as this world of temptation that will distract you and take you away. So whatever you need to do, like say, move to a different, literally, I've raised a lot of dogs. Go to a different table to check your email. Be very Pavlovian, condition yourself. This is sacred writing place. Don't let yourself do that. It's so easy. And for all you guys, and checking your phone is the same thing. So however you do it. So, just keep control over that distraction. It's enormous. I have to say, I face it every day. I think the AA comparison is a good one, especially we're all quite addicted to our media and our connections to the world, of course. Okay, I'm going to quote another person, an old senior scholar in the field when I was writing, and I said, how do I know when I'm done? And she said, when you don't have any more time. And that sounds really dumb, but it's so true. And for some people, there's often a point, let's say, I have students who they could probably finish by May, but they could probably take the fall. Well, I've had students where all of a sudden a job comes up in June, and they've just got to really haul ass and finish. So, you need to know approximately when you can finish and know what your flexibility is, because sometimes you can take a TA ship in your department or something, to extend the time, but be ready to really, there's just a set of opportunities that can come along. And it's a terrible moment in a certain way in graduate school, because everything's sort of behind you. You have no idea what's ahead of you. You've run out of money. Your friends don't want to talk to you anymore. Your mother's like, why did you do this? Why didn't you become a lawyer? It's there's all those things going around. So you have to really have the faith and hold on to it. But I think when you keep yourself on a kind of a sense of a schedule, it could be here, but I could, extend it here. But being able to move off the dime if the opportunity arises is really important. And sometimes that means I never wrote the chapter on the United Healthcare Agency in Fargo, North Dakota that made all the difference in the abortion debate there for my dissertation. And 2 years later, I wrote it up, and it was a nice article. So there you go. I did a poll in my building with all the anthro students writing their dissertations. Our writing group's helpful. There was a variety of opinions. So on one side it's really nice, you feel isolated, it's good to have the social support and people who don't treat you like you're crazy, that you're spending all this time doing that, and people who know you. On the other hand, several of them said, actually, writing groups where you know everyone, too much id, not enough super ego, because it's too easy to get away with not turning it in. And so actually a few people have found, and it's an advantage of being in New York City, that they found affinity groups of people working on whatever it might be. In this case, it was a sort of science studies group throughout the city. And they don't know each other that well. And they actually have a rule, if everybody doesn't turn in their writing, they can't go have a drink afterwards. Kind of like my, can I go to the movies question. So I think, hopefully you all have good relationships with your supervisor. Your supervisor or supervisors, your primary group are just to echo what Tom said, that is your primary audience. Go back and talk with them, whenever. That's your first writing, not your friends and your writing group, even however wonderful they may be. I think that's it, because I think I'm probably, I don't know if I have time.
You actually have a little bit.
I do? Okay.
About 3 minutes, 3-4 minutes.
Perfect. So, I think there's only one person who's studied with me who knows that I like to show media, and I also think people learn best and produce best when they have, with pleasure, usually. So I decided to poke around and, because I think it's good. People have hobbies. I know I've had students who are prize winning, in addition to writing their very serious anthropology dissertations, prize winning filmmakers, poets, this and that. Of course, a lot of my students make media. So feed the other side of your brain when you need to take a break, because it will help you think, or run the marathon, or, not don't train too much for a marathon while you're writing. It takes too much time. Like for me, swimming is it. Anyway, so I thought I'd poke around YouTube and see what people wrote about troubles with doing dissertations. So I did waste a lot of time today looking at a lot of really bad YouTube songs about writing dissertations. There's some pretty hilarious ones. The runner-up was one written to the Rolling Stones tune, I Can't Get No Satisfaction, only it was I Can't Write No Dissertation. You can look it up. But this one won, so I thought just for fun I'd put this one here.
Scratching my fingers and my printer won't print. What on earth to write? Haven't got a hint. Don't know what club I'm joining, but I'm paying my dues 'cause I got the dissertation. I wrote my introduction and did my lit review. It took a whole semester for that part to get through. But now there's just one day left. Got the time to snooze and I got the dissertation.
She's looking crazier, notice. No money, she's using a kazoo. Very cheap instrument.
It didn't take too long to write my methodology. Then I got to travel around a bit. Research sites to see. Did I say the word transcription? Got to share that news. Now I got the dissertation. I made it through 10,000 tapes and coded millions more. And a really groovy topic turned into a total bore. Now I'm supposed to write it up with brilliant words and views. But I got the dissertation. All songs come to an end, but not all students graduate. I better write up my results, so you'll appreciate my dazzling conclusion. My defense you can't refuse, and I can lose this dissertation.
So you don't have to waste money now going online because I found the best one.
Okay. Well, congratulations everyone for getting this far in the process. And I'm going to piggyback a lot of what's been said, but take a little more of a psychological approach in terms of, talking about what resources there are to offer here at NYU and things to keep in mind as you embark on this journey. So many students present to the Counseling Center experiencing a lot of decreased motivation, concentration, and the words, commonly used are writer's block, and I just feel stuck. So today I'm briefly going to talk about, some foundations for success, why people feel stuck, some barriers to success, and what we can do. And then I'll just briefly give some more resources because the time today is, quite limited. So I encourage people to look, on our website, and I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. But just to first point out, and I know it's so hard to remember this, it's so easy to say and really hard to practice, but the foundations for success are usually the first things to go, but are very imperative to functioning. And these are the most basic: sleep, nutrition, and exercise. And again, it's really easy to say, I just need to stay up and, finish 3 more pages, and I can't go to bed until I do that. And again, it's hard, it's really easy for this to fall to the wayside, but it's really important to allow your mind and your body, that return to homeostasis. And you've been so active that you need this more restful period as well. So getting plenty of rest, allowing your unconscious to solidify your ideas. I don't know if people have had that experience, but sometimes you're like, I just can't study anymore. You choose to go to bed and you wake up and, your brain has worked through some things, or you wake up with, a new great idea. Nutrition, again, it's easier, to eat McDonald's or to not care about what we're eating. But if you really can take an approach where you think about, food as energy, that can change. And, if you have a protein shake, just concentrating on what you are putting in your body as fuel for your functioning. Similarly, exercise, I frequently hear people say, I don't have time to go to the gym right now. Again, making that time and being physically active allows us to burn off steam, especially when we're using our brain so much. So I really encourage this type of balance. Like other people have mentioned, the social support. And then more psychologically, the awareness of your mood and your stress level. You know, obviously there's other things going on in your life as well. You might be, you know, in someone's wedding, or, you know, needing to celebrate an anniversary or something like that. So take these things into consideration and see if you can plan ahead, because the goal, in my mind, is flexibility and balance. Also, to take a moment to, if you can, to understand why you're feeling stuck. This can really help us encourage self-awareness and therefore increase our self-confidence. It can also promote some positive thinking and improve our performance. We can learn strategies and techniques to enhance our focus, concentration, and relaxation. And we can develop strategies to better manage our time and to set realistic and achievable goals. So just to briefly mention some common obstacles to people performing well. You know, thinking about what hinders you. We've kind of already mentioned this in the talk today, but thinking about, for many people, it's a cycle between procrastination and perfectionism. So we have this idea and what we want to create and what we want our work to look like, and therefore we have to set a certain amount of time aside to produce this. We have to read a certain amount of research studies, and again, there's always more. So if you believe you always must give 100%, then you're more inclined to put things off until you're able to do so, until you have that block of 5 hours of uninterrupted time. So perfectionism is defined as a self-defeating thoughts and behaviors aimed at reaching excessively high and unrealistic goals. It usually involves the following components, so see if any of these resonate for you. Fear of failure, making mistakes, and disapproval. Perfectionists often equate failure to achieve their goals with a lack of personal worth and value. All or nothing thinking. Perfectionists frequently believe that they are worthless unless their accomplishments are not perfect. Perfectionists have difficulty seeing situations in perspective. So for example, a student might receive 4 A's and 1 B, yet see receiving a B as being a complete and total failure. So again, it's this kind of catastrophizing thought process. And lastly, for perfectionism, think about if you do this to yourself, and some people call it, you know, shoulding yourself. If you have a lot of shoulds, perfectionists often think that in an endless list of shoulds that serve as rigid rules of how life must be led. So if you always believe that you should be doing something more or something else, you're no longer in the moment, and you tend to live more in regret or fear, and you can really get caught up in ruminating and dwelling about the shoulds. Secondly, the other, part of the cycle is the procrastination. And this is defined as an act of replacing high priority actions or tasks with low priority ones, thus putting things off to a later time. People might not feel able to break projects down into smaller and more realistic steps, and we do so many things to avoid procrastinating and to reduce our anticipated failure and all the things I previously mentioned. So things to remember though, everyone procrastinates. We all do it, and we all do it because it works. It helps us avoid in the short term. We feel better in that moment, but in the long term it fuels that cycle of, well, I'll just wait until, tomorrow till I have this abyss of time to complete this abyss of pages. So,
you really need to clean your bathroom.
See, it works.
And then mine.
So it results in failing to complete something, and that causes increased anxiety and stress. So some components include, for procrastination, fear of success. We feel sometimes that if we work to our full capacity, maybe we'll become workaholics or increase others' expectations of us. So we'll just say, oh, if I do the bare minimum, they won't expect that much of me. That's a little easier. Sometimes, and for some people, it's about fear of losing autonomy. So you can't make me do this. It maintains a sense of control. So your advisor's telling you, write your introduction by Friday, and you're just like, you can't force me to do that. I'll show you. Then there's this fear of attachment. So it's keeping a barrier between ourselves and others. And remember, going back to the link between, procrastination and perfectionism, if you're in fear of making mistakes, then you're more likely to avoid opportunities and hence less likely to grow. So why do we procrastinate? Again, we expect perfection. We might not be pleased with our work. We don't like what we've produced, and therefore we don't want to face it, evaluate it, or revise it. We're too busy. We have jobs, friends, classes, extracurriculars, family. We have poor time management, difficulty concentrating. We might experience fear and anxiety, and once again, it works. It's easier to avoid doing the tasks we don't like, such as writing our dissertation, than doing things we do like watching TV, being with friends, spending time with people. So again, it seems like an obvious choice, and I hope to validate people's experiences who I'm confident everyone in this room has procrastinated. But again, it can turn into this vicious cycle of perfectionism and procrastination, that we set these unrealistic and unachievable goals, and then we fail to meet these goals because they were unachievable. Then we feel the constant pressure to achieve perfectionism and chronic failure. And then there's a reduction in our productivity and effectiveness. We self-criticize, we blame, we should have done more work, and we lower our self-esteem, and this can lead, to anxiety and depression. And then it sets the cycle in motion again. On a brighter note, what can we do? So what we can do is we can commit. We can set achievable goals. We can practice healthy time management skills. We can focus our connection. I don't know if anyone has practiced either mindfulness or meditation, staying present focused. We can be confident, feel grounded in who we are and what we are doing, and being really mindful when we're connecting our dissertation to our self-worth as a whole. We can draw on positive images and positive memories. Either maybe you've finished a thesis or you've done something similar in the past that you can be confident and know that you can do this as well. Mental readiness, so you can plan, prepare, and evaluate. Just get started on the writing as people have suggested, maybe revise at another time. Distraction control. So ways to maintain a positive focus when faced with distractions, even negative inputs and setbacks. Life happens. You might need to attend to a friend or a sick child or go to a funeral, something like that. We don't work in a perfect, trajectory, so can you keep those ideas in mind that things will happen, and be flexible with your time as well. And then ongoing learning, again, reflecting why we're committed to doing this project, what went well and why, and continue targets for improvement. And lastly, because I know, time isn't warranted to go into all of these things in depth, but at the Counseling and Wellness Center, we do have toolkits for time management. These meet on the first and second Tuesdays of each month from 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock. Also on our website, you can find information about the meditation relaxation oasis. Peer support group, talk to others, maybe. Discuss ideas with mentors, advisors, and family, so people don't always have to be in this vein. It can be nice to have an outside perspective. Feel free to call us and make an appointment at the Counseling Center if this is something that you feel like you could use help on, and maybe a therapist can be a nice outside support for you. And I encourage you to look up, if you want more information about this, you can not procrastinate on it, but Google peak performance and see what comes up, because it'll be a lot of strategies that I mentioned today. So good luck to everyone.
As proof that you can graduate and leave NYU. It is not the Hotel California here. You can get out. And so I was sent a list of questions to answer, a list of things. So if you'll bear with me, I'm going to go through the prompts and just talk through my personal experience, some of which will overlap and some of which is actually radically different. I got very nervous during some of this that I wasn't going to finish my dissertation, and then I remembered that I did. So there are different ways for everyone. But so the first question is this general strategy about choosing a topic if you're not there yet. The best, I would say two things here. One, the best advice that I got on this topic was somebody who said to me, you're the one who has to live with it for 10 years. You have to live with it through the process of the dissertation and through turning it into your first book if you want to go the academic route. So you have to like it, right? Not your advisor, not some hole you think should be filled because it'll make you unique, but you don't find it particularly interesting. If you actually like your dissertation topic, it will be an easier process and it will go better. I mean, it sounds sort of self-evident, but I, for one, almost failed in that. The other thing I would tell you is to explore, and for what it's worth, I had 4 different dissertation topics, all of which I fully explored the literature, the lit of the field. I wrote proposals. I wrote all of this. And my advisor, bless him, kept saying to me every time I was getting ready to swap, until the 4th when he hoped I'd keep it then. But up until then, he kept saying to me, okay, you just mastered a body of literature. You just created a course. You just created background knowledge for when you're a professor. Now let's take from that, take what you liked and moved on. You know, there's a finite time. I did this all in a very compact, you know, several semester or so. But the point of that really is that if you start this topic and you find it doesn't work for you, again, you have to like it. You have to live with it. If you choose wrong, choose again, right? And you'll get there. The best 2 or 3 tips for completing the dissertation, and this I sort of got the same piece of advice in 2 different ways from 2 different people that really worked with me. One is that this is a driver's license. It's not every drive you'll ever take. And the other is that one of my mentors always said to me, this is not your first book, this is your last paper. And for me, that was really important, right? She said to me over and over, this is the last paper you're going to write in grad school. It is not the first book that you'll ever write. And by framing it that way, one of the things that it freed me to do is to realize that dissertations are imperfect, right? I was not intellectually over the project when I finished the dissertation. And what I'm working on now is very different than where I was when I finished the dissertation. But it's all a trajectory of thinking about these same issues and taking them in different ways. So that's one of the things I would say, right? You're not going to be finished intellectually, and that's actually good, right? You want to have still the ability to think and change your mind and allow in new ways to think about things. Writing space has been mentioned here. For me, I finished my last year. I was actually a Humanities Initiative Fellow, which for me was sort of like heaven. But it meant that I found my writing space, and I was lucky enough to have a space here. But this goes for routine in that I woke up every morning by 5 actually, was at the gym before 7. I had to come all the way from Brooklyn, it was a while. Had the gym before 7, at this desk by about 8:30 every morning, and I wrote here until dark, and I went home. But what that meant is I never wrote at home, right? So that rather than finding the sacred writing space, which I did, I also kept a sacred relaxation space. When I was home, I did not write, and I didn't think about it. And connected to that, for me, was a pledge that I made to myself, which is going to counteract some of the advice that we've had before, but this is what worked for me. And I should say that this is a pledge that I didn't put into action until I was sort of teetering on the edge of sanity, unsure what would happen. And that's when I pledged to myself to take 1 day off a week. In which I did nothing related to my dissertation. And I actually did some of the most inane, mind-numbing, dumb things I could think of, such as after completing my 3rd chapter, when I watched a marathon of The Real Housewives of New York for 1 complete day. And I have to say that there is nothing on earth that will make you want to get back to intellectual production, like listening to those people speak to each other. So for me, that was really, really useful, was to really clear my head as such. So in addition to giving myself the permission to do something so frigging inane, I would say deadlines. And we've talked about that some here, but what really worked for me was not to say 5 pages of writing a week, but to make myself a series of deadlines, or to be honest, my older sister made them, and if you want to borrow her, I'll give you her email. She put me on a really strict schedule, right? So that by the end of this week, I had to have this part of this chapter done. By the end of that week, I had to have this part done. So for me, I actually didn't do it by the day. I did it by what I was going to get done in every 2-week period, and it was up to me how I divided it. And then I actually gave my advisor the copy of the schedule. And I said to him, I need you to know that this is when you're getting things. And so what that did, he probably forgot, I've never asked. But for me, you know, I was in my mind right before, no, I have a deadline and I can't, he's waiting for it. And so that was something that was really important for me, was to work according to a series of over my head deadlines, rather than a daily goal. Now, with that, 2 caveats. One was that I gave myself a break from deadlines when I hit milestones, which meant that I took about a week off of writing every time I got a chapter draft out to somebody. And that doesn't mean I took a week off of my dissertation, right? I took a week in which I might have read some just secondary source books, or where I might have just translated documents, but that I didn't, or I might have written outlines, but I didn't sit down and try to start writing. For me, my next chapter, that was something that I had built into my schedule, that I got this week off of writing. Caveat number 2 for me was that for me, it worked very, very well to have friends around. So one of the reasons writing in this space worked for me is because 3 of us were writing in it, and we wouldn't talk for a stretch, and then we would talk for 15 minutes, and then we wouldn't talk for an hour and a half, and then we would talk. And so for me, that was really important not to feel isolated. I had other friends outside of here with whom I've swapped everything. I have a very close friend who works on anthropology in Venezuela. I've read everything she's ever written. She's read everything I've ever written. I write about 19th century Egypt. She writes about 21st century Venezuela, right? We couldn't, but knowing that somebody was there who can read it and give you feedback, and we keep each other on schedule, for me was really important. Advice to students who have trouble finishing. This is also going to counteract some other advice that we've gotten here today, but for me, conferences were really important. And what I did is that I took time before, as I sort of laid out my broad deadline, and I sent out conference proposals that I made up for different chapters and different parts of my chapters, staggering them, so that I knew that I would have to have, if I got into the conference, I would have to have that produced. So that for me, the conference became another form of deadline. And that's so that almost each of my chapters, I shopped at a conference, or shopped part of it at a conference that, of course, I'd applied for 6 months ahead of time, knowing where I wanted to be by then. And I have to say that that's something for me, even now that I'm finished. In the next year, I have certain things I have to do because I committed to conferences for them. So for me, that worked. When you're having trouble finishing, this too shall pass, right? And I think that that's really important, that we get stuck and we see it, and this too shall pass. It's not fun, right? It's not fun. It's really, really hard. You're bonded with the people you go through this forever, right? There's nothing bonding quite like it. The year before, and I think that we have to acknowledge as well how hard it is. We're broke. We're in a city that's really great, but they want a lot of money from you to be great. You probably have friends from college who, didn't do nearly as well as you were, and are now making somewhere around 50 to 100 times as much as you'll ever make, and that's sometimes hard to swallow, right? Even if you're not in touch with them, they're probably showing you their vacations on Facebook. All of that's really hard, right? I remember the year before I had this fellowship, I was a TA, a research assistant for 2 professors, and I had an outside job at the SSRC, and my mother asked me at least once a week when I was going to be finished. And you kind of want to cry. And that's putting it nicely, but you just have to take a deep breath and not pop off, and it's hard, and this too shall pass, right? We're doing it for a reason. There's something in it that's driving you. How to avoid writer's block. You've gotten a lot of good advice for it. For me, I avoided I didn't avoid it, but I worked through it by journaling, right? So making myself sit down and just writing whatever I want. And when I go back to the early drafts, because I tended to save it, I have a lot of them that in the middle of it, I'm like, la-di-da, I don't know what to do. What should I eat for dinner, right? And I just made myself keep writing. And for me, that's what worked. So that it also is kind of funny for me now, right? I go back and I inadvertently have a complete diary of my favorite takeout places in Brooklyn scattered throughout my dissertation. Okay, what would you recommend? Any resources for students to read? I read Writing Your Dissertation in 15 minutes a day, then I had a panic attack and threw it away. So I have nothing to offer you on that one. Preparing for the job market while writing your dissertation. Okay, this actually is, I think, really a great question. This is a really tough one. I would say, ideally, to go on the market when you have 2 chapters ready-ish, because one's going to have to be a writing sample and one's going to have to be a job talk, if you're lucky enough to get that. Now, get as much done over the summer before you plan to go on the job market as possible. This includes, right, and if you could do some I had no idea, right? I went on the job market like like I had a paper bag over my head or something. I had no idea what was going on. You need a teaching portfolio, you need a research portfolio, you need a lot of things. If you could start preparing for them, and I don't know if your departments offer this, but if you could start preparing actually the year before you think you're going on it, it would be my best advice. I went through the NYU History Department's job market workshops. I did it though the semester that I was going on the market because I didn't think about it ahead of time. And so it was all a bit of a mad rush. But it was very helpful, right? So if your department has something like that, do it. If they don't, ask them to have it. One caveat in this, if I say anything about the job markets, we focused on getting a job. We did not focus on postdocs. So this is the secret that I did not know. When they say postdoc cover letter, they mean a job letter for a postdoc. I sent out countless postdocs with cover letters that said, "To whom it may concern, attached, please find 1, 2, 3." And I could not understand why I was getting job interviews and getting cut from every postdoc in the first round. And I finally asked somebody who had a postdoc, and she said, "Well, let me see your cover letter." And I showed it to her, and she actually burst out laughing, right? You know, here they're expecting 2-page narrative about me as a scholar, and I'm writing attached, please find 1 CV, 2, research proposal, 3. So postdoc letters are job letters for a postdoc. That is, I think, the best advice I can give about that. Now, the final thing is I was asked to tell you anything that you would feel comfortable sharing, that I would feel comfortable sharing. And I would say it's an ugly, messy process. It just is, right? And the best is, I actually think you might have said this to me, Tom, that the best dissertation is a finished dissertation, right? I didn't love my dissertation at all. I loved my ideas. I still love my ideas. I loved how alive my mind felt during the process, right? And the things I was thinking about. But I didn't get it out in writing in any way that I find perfect, right? But I got it out, and I've gotten 2 jobs from it thus far, and I'm able to keep up the process of thinking about these ideas I like and playing with how to write them. So that's number 1, I would say. Like, it it doesn't have to be perfect. It's never going to be, and if it is, well, then you're not thinking hard enough. The other thing I would say is that I think doubting yourself is actually a part of it, and this goes with procrastinating. I doubted myself horribly, right? I doubted I wanted to stay in academia. I doubted I could finish. It was Asia remembers an early conversation where I announced, I don't remember what I was going to do, but I believe I was going to open a bakery. Right. It's a part of it, and the best you can do, I think, is be kind to yourself through it. Get into intellectual discussions that really work for you. For me, one of the things that really worked for me was having a space in which I had an intellectual discussion that wasn't about my field, right? So that I was doing a degree on the Middle East in the joint Middle Eastern history program, studying Egypt, and it actually became very helpful for me to talk to people who were not studying the Middle East, right? And for me, that's what then brought me back into the broader world of why I love this. Whatever works for you, do. But I cried, I hyperventilated, I had panic attacks, I felt defeated. I had moments of sheer joy. I go back to things I wrote and I think, hey, that's really not too bad. I pat myself on the back. I think it's all a part of the process, or at least it was for me. And for me, it was a process in which throughout the ups and downs, I felt very much alive, because your mind is very much alive and there's a certain excitement to that. But it's messy, and you got to be kind to yourself, and you go get a massage or buy a new shirt or eat a cupcake, or whatever it is that does it for you, you should do, because it'll be over soon enough, right? And you're almost there. If you're sitting in here, then you're almost there, and congratulations for that.